Okay, if you have your Bible, you can turn to Revelation chapter 20. We're almost finished with our study of the book of Revelation. We'll have a lot to get through tonight, so we'll move pretty quickly. Just a review from last week, we studied two chapters, chapter 18 and 19. 18 read as an obituary for the harlot, which was destroyed by the Antichrist at mid-tribulation. And then in chapter 19, we saw events in heaven, followed by events in the earth. We saw worship around the throne, and then we saw just a quick mention, but not a lot of detail about the marriage of the Lamb and then the wedding supper of the Lamb. And then we saw events on the earth, such as the return of Christ, and we came back with him, the battle of Armageddon, and then the Antichrist and the false prophet were thrown in the lake of fire. And chapter 20 picks up where those events left off. It's a continuation of those events. So we'll start here in verse 1. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. He laid hold of the dragon, that serpent of old who was the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he cast him into the bottomless pit and shut him up and set a seal on him, so that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years were finished. But after these things he must be released for a little while. So following the battle of Armageddon, the Antichrist and the false prophet are thrown in the lake of fire. Jesus comes back with the saints just before that. And then Satan is thrown into the bottomless pit, bound for 1,000 years. We call that 1,000 years the millennial reign, or the millennium, where Jesus rules the entire earth. He's the only person to ever rule the earth in its entirety. And then at the end of these three verses, we see that Satan must be released for a little while. So we'll look at that later about why he must be released. Let's go on with verse 4 now. And I saw thrones, and they sat on them. The they that it's talking about is us, the saints who return with Jesus. And judgment was committed to them. Then I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their witness to Jesus and for the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received his mark on their foreheads or on their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead did not live again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he who has part in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power. But they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. So we see mention of two resurrections. As mentioned in verse 4, the people on the thrones, that will be us, the saints, throughout the ages we come back with Christ. We will return as kings and priests. We will rule and reign with Christ for 1,000 years for that millennium. And during that time, there will still be people in the earth, mortal people. Because remember, so far throughout the tribulation, we've seen that it ends with the battle of Armageddon, when this massive army is destroyed, the false prophet and the Antichrist are thrown in the lake of fire. But you still have many people, millions or billions of people around the world, who will still be physically living on the earth. And so they will also be living on the earth during this millennial reign of Jesus. And they'll be living their lives as they do today. They'll be going to work. They'll be getting married, having children. And we will be ruling and reigning over them. And Jesus will be reigning over the entire earth. And so there will still be cities and nations and divisions of different geographical locations. And we will be given our assignment for that 1,000 years during our time in heaven, the 7 years of the tribulation. And so Hilton Sutton says that during the 7 years of the tribulation, we will be going back to school, so to speak. We will be learning what our assignment is during that 1,000 years, and we will be being prepared for that assignment, because God won't give someone an assignment without giving them the ability to carry out that assignment. And so we will return with Christ as kings and priests, and we will know our assignment and how to accomplish it for that 1,000 years. But as I was studying this chapter, it occurred to me that something we need to keep in mind, something very important, is that the spiritual state of us today is no different than it will be at that time in the millennium. Things will occur in the earth that will change. We will have our glorified bodies then, which we don't have today. Jesus will be on the earth, ruling and reigning, but spiritually we are going to be in the exact same state then as we are today. And so when we hear a little bit later, we will be looking at what the millennium will look like in the earth. And we need to remember that although these events are describing things that occur during that 1,000 years, we're spiritually still the same today as we will be then. And so I'll bring that out more here in a little bit. But we see mention of 2 resurrections. There's mention of those who were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast or his image, had not received the mark. This is referring to the martyrs of the second half of the tribulation. They will be resurrected on the first day of the millennium, which is the last day of the tribulation, and they will join with us to rule and reign in the earth. The rest of the dead, the wicked, will not be resurrected until the end of the millennium. So there's 1,000 years between these 2 resurrections. The first resurrection includes, the company of it will include all of the righteous dead throughout the ages. It will include also those who are a part of the 4 raptures that we've talked about so far, the church which is raptured before the tribulation begins, the converts of the 144,000 who are taken out of the earth at mid-tribulation, the 144,000 themselves who are raptured approximately 5 months after mid-tribulation, and then the 2 witnesses are also raptured at the end of tribulation. So this will make up this company of people who are described as the first resurrection. And the benefit of that company is that they will have nothing to do with the second death, as it says in verse 6. Now the second death we'll see in a moment is being thrown into the lake of fire. So that has nothing to do with us. We will not be thrown into the lake of fire. We will be priests of God and of Christ, and we will reign with him for 1,000 years in the earth. And then verse 7. We see Satan is released, and he tries to have another rebellion against God, which does not go well. Verse 7 says, "Now when the 1,000 years have expired, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations which are in the 4 corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, whose number is as the sand of the sea. They went up on the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. The devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever." So the question then is, why would Satan has been bound for 1,000 years? Why would God release Satan after that? And the answer to that question is because God is a just God. Verse 3 said that Satan must be released for a little while. So prior to the millennial reign, every person who has ever lived in the earth has had to make the choice between God and Satan. And during the millennium, remember, people are going to be living natural lives. They're going to be getting married. They're going to have children. So there will be people born in the earth who only experience the millennial reign of Christ. And during that time, Satan is bound. And so there will still be the temptation to sin, but they will not be facing the decision between Satan and God. And so if Satan had not been released at the end of this millennial reign, then those people the people who had been wicked before the millennium could stand before God and accuse him of not being fair and just because they were given a different set of circumstances than those who were born in the millennium. So God must release Satan. It's only for a short time, as it says in verse 3. But even during that time, after this amazing 1,000-year reign, which we'll look at in detail in a moment, it's a reign of peace and blessing. And even after that incredible 1,000 years in the earth, you'll still have a great number of people who will follow Satan, even in that short time. And so what does Satan do? He he tries to have another rebellion against God, and it fails miserably. So if you're wondering how people could choose to follow Satan even after such an amazing 1,000 years, you can look in, we're not going to go there tonight, but Zechariah chapter 14, near the end of the chapter, it describes how people will be serving Jesus, who rules the entire earth, but they will be doing it really just going through the motions. They won't have their heart in it. And so when Satan is released, they jump at the opportunity to join him in this rebellion against God. And then these 4 verses we just read say that his followers will be as many as the number of the sea of the sand of the sea. So he gets a very great following. They surround the capital of the world, which will be Jerusalem, and they are consumed by fire. Satan is finally cast into the lake of fire, where the Antichrist and the false prophet have been for the last 1,000 years. And they will be experiencing eternal torment from there on. So let's take a moment and describe what this millennium will look like. We actually have several scriptures in the Bible that describe this 1,000 years. Remember, there will be survivors from all the nations of the world, many of whom will be unsaved, many of whom will be saved, people who have come to Christ during the tribulation. And so first, let's go to Genesis chapter 15. We see that during this millennium, God will restore the land of Israel, the original boundaries. Genesis 15, verse 18. This is God making a covenant with Abraham, or Abram at this time. And this covenant will last forever. It says, "On the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, 'To your descendants I have given this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river of Euphrates.'" The river of Egypt is the Nile River. The river Euphrates flows north, kind of diagonally across Iraq. And so this land mass between the Nile River, which flows north and south across Egypt, all the way over to about half of Iraq and everything in between, which includes the Sinai Peninsula and the Arabian Peninsula, where Saudi Arabia and all these nations are, as well as Syria and the present-day Israel, which is just a sliver of this massive landmass. All of that is going to be restored to Israel during the 1,000-year reign of Christ. And we know that the Jewish people who are in this populated wilderness, we looked at that several weeks ago, they will still be in the earth, and they will have accepted Christ as their Savior at that time, and they will be brought back into this land just as originally intended when God made this covenant with Abram. And there will also be mortals in all the nations of the earth. And again, we're going to be ruling and reigning over all of them. We will be the kings over the earth, and then Jesus will be the King of Kings. Turn over now to Ezekiel chapter 37. I mentioned a moment ago that we will have an assignment in the millennium. Now, we don't know what our assignment is going to be. We'll get that assignment when we're in heaven before we return. But we do see David's assignment here. In Ezekiel chapter 37, we'll read verses 24 and 25. It says, "David, my servant, shall be king over them, and they shall all have one shepherd. They shall also walk in my judgments and observe my statutes and do them. And they shall dwell in the land that I have given to Jacob, my servant, where your fathers dwelt. And they shall dwell there, and their children and their children's children forever, and my servant David shall be their prince forever." So we know that David will be the ruler or the king or the prince over Israel during this time. He will be one of those who is resurrected when Christ appears and we meet him in the air. He will return with us when Christ comes back to earth just before the Battle of Armageddon. And then Israel is going to be restored, and David will be their king for that 1,000 years and then even into eternity. As mentioned, many of the people in the earth will not be saved. They will have rejected Christ even through the tribulation. And so there will still be opportunities for people to get saved. So there will be ministers in the millennial reign. That may be some of our assignments, is to be ministers and win people to the Lord. Some will accept him, but as I mentioned before, some will just go through the motions. And then when Satan is released, they will continue to reject Christ and join Satan in his rebellion. As mentioned earlier in Revelation chapter 20, Satan is bound during this time, so there is no tempter as we have today. Turn over to Isaiah. Now we'll look at a few verses in Isaiah that describe the millennial reign. Isaiah chapter 2. We see here in verses 1 through 4 that there will be no war during this 1,000 years. Chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "The word that Isaiah the son of Amoz sent concerning Judah and Jerusalem. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all the nations shall flow to it. Many people shall come and say, Come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." Verse 4, "He shall judge between the nations and rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks." So these weapons that exist today will actually be destroyed or even converted into useful tools during that time. "Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." So we will have 1,000 years of peace across the entire earth. And certainly in our lifetimes, maybe throughout all of history, there's never been a time when there has not been some war or some conflict occurring, but when Jesus is ruling the earth, there will not be any war for 1,000 years. Turn over now to chapter 11 of Isaiah. Those who love animals are going to like this chapter. It describes what animals will be doing during the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Isaiah 11, verse 6, "The wolf shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, the calf with the young lion, and the fatling together. The little child shall lead them, the cow and the bear shall graze, their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play by the cobra's hole, the weaned child shall put his hand in the viper's den. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea." So there will be no wild animals during the 1,000-year reign. In fact, lions and these animals which eat other animals will not even be harming each other. They'll be eating plants, as was originally intended for the animals. They won't be harming humans. A child could go up and pet a lion the way that it pets a cat or a dog. And then I like verse 9, which says, "The earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea." So as my dad has said before, the glory of the Lord is already here. It's the knowledge of the Lord, which will be full in the 1,000-year reign. So this goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Our spiritual condition does not change between now and then. So you can disagree with me if you like, but I believe that if the church were operating in its full capacity with no limits, the limits being a lack of faith or a lack of knowledge, then this would be the state of the earth today. The children of God would be ruling and reigning. Animals wouldn't be harming each other. They wouldn't be harming humans. Of course, we have a very long ways to go before that occurs. During the 1,000-year reign, it will absolutely occur, but I believe that as we get closer and closer to the rapture of the church, we'll see the church operating in more and more of the authority that is available to them and the power of God in the earth. And then when we are taken out of here, then of course all the events of the tribulation occur, and then we return with Christ and we rule and reign as kings. And we see that God is bringing back divine order to the earth which this is actually the earth as it exists today. This is not the new earth. So it all goes back to what kind of limitations we have on ourselves. We're only limiting ourselves by our lack of faith and our lack of knowledge of the glory of God which exists in the earth today. And so this is, I'm glad my dad's been talking about faith on Sunday mornings. It's been very good. This is something the Holy Spirit pointed out to me several weeks ago when we weren't just starting our study of the book of Revelation, but we were a few chapters into it. And I felt that we needed to get back to the basics of faith and prosperity and healing and authority, the gifts of the Spirit, because we need to be firmly established in those things. It all goes back to faith, really. Everything is rooted in this faith. But we need to understand that. We need to have those principles down, just like the back of our hand, because that is how we bring about this order that we see throughout these chapters in Isaiah and some of the other ones that we're going to look at. All right, so let's continue here in chapter 11, verse 10. And in that day there shall be a root of Jesse. This is talking about continuing that restoration of Israel, who shall stand as a banner to the people. For the Gentiles shall seek him, and his resting place shall be glorious. It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord has set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people who are left from Assyria and Egypt and on and on. Let's go down to verse 12. He will set up a banner for the nations and will assemble the outcasts of Israel and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. So again, the Jewish people will return to this restored Israel. Verse 13, the envy of Ephraim shall depart, the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not harass Ephraim. But they shall fly down upon the shoulder of the Philistines toward the west. Together they shall plunder the people of the east. They shall lay their hand on Edom and Moab, and the people of Ammon shall obey them. The Lord will utterly destroy the tongue of the sea of Egypt. With his mighty wind he will shake his fist over the river and strike it in the seven streams and make men cross over dry shod. There will be a highway for the remnant of his people who will be left from Assyria, as it was for Israel in the day that he came up from the land of Egypt. So this is God restoring Israel's land as well as the people and the tribes of Israel and bringing them together in peace with each other and with other nations. You notice that Israel has victory over its opponents, but remember there is no war during the 1,000 years. So even though one may read this chapter and think Israel is going to go against these other nations in a great victorious war, this is actually a peaceful transition of power. For the peaceful transitions of power never occur, but it will occur during the millennium when Christ is ruling over the earth. And so God is going to restore divine order to the earth, and we see it here describing the order that's being restored to Israel. Turn now to Isaiah chapter 65. We see further description of this millennial reign of Christ. Verse 20, Isaiah 65:20. No more shall an infant from there live but a few days, nor an old man who has not fulfilled his days. For the child shall die 100 years old, but the sinner being 100 years old shall be accursed. So this is saying that sickness and disease will not be rampant in the earth during the millennial reign. There will be no child deaths. People will have very long lives. 100 years old is considered a child during the millennial reign. And those who do die during the millennium will be a result of their rebellion against the Lord, because the wages of sin is death. But those who are righteous, who are following Christ, they will not experience death during that 1,000 years. Verse 21, they shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat their fruit. So it's going to be a very prosperous time throughout the earth. Verse 22, they shall not build and another inhabit. They shall not plant and another eat. So Hilton Sutton said this means there won't be any welfare during the millennium. It also means there won't be any robbery. You're not going to put forth some effort only to have someone else enjoy the result of that effort. Continuing in verse 22, for as the days of a tree, so shall be the days of my people. My elect shall long enjoy the work of their hands. So we will be busy during this 1,000 years. Remember, we're going to have assignments. We're going to have jobs, so to speak, but we're going to greatly enjoy the work that we do. We're creation. We are creatures which are designed to be productive, right? We're not designed to sit stagnant and receive a welfare check and feel fulfilled. We are designed to put forth work and be productive and then enjoy the results of that work. And during the millennium, we're going to be carrying out these assignments with great success, and we are going to love the work that we are doing. Verse 23, they shall not labor in vain, nor bring forth children in trouble, for they shall be descendants of the blessed of the Lord and their offspring with them. So today we have many people who don't want to have children because they don't know what the future holds. During the millennium, people are going to have such a bright outlook of the state of the world. They're going to be having children without fear. And then now let's go. We've already discussed, but remember, Israel will be restored according to Genesis chapter 15. David will be king over Israel. There will be ministers throughout the millennium to get people saved who have still rejected Christ, even to that point. You can see that in Isaiah chapter 66. And there will be seasons of the year then, just as we have them now. I'll flip over here. You don't have to go there. I just want to make sure I read it correctly. It's Genesis chapter 8, verse 22. It says, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. And so this is the same earth that we inhabit today. So we will still have seasons. We're still going to have day and night, seed time and harvest. So it's going to be a prosperous, blessed time throughout the earth. People are going to be living very long lives. We will be busy. People in the earth will be busy, and we will be performing work and enjoying the works that we are performing. Let's go back now to Revelation chapter 20 and finish out this chapter. Starting again in verse 11. All right. So Satan has been cast into the lake of fire here. Verse 11 says, Then I saw a great white throne, and him who sat on it, from whose face the earth and heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before God. This is referring to the wicked. And another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged according to their works by the things which were written in the books. The sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death and Hades delivered up the dead who were in them. And they were judged, each one according to his works. Then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. So remember, the second death, as it was referred to in verse 6, is being cast into the lake of fire. And then verse 15, and anyone not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. So our names are written in the book of life. So according to verses 5 and 6, we will not experience the second death. We will not be cast into the lake of fire. But we see here in verses 11 through 15 the judgment of the wicked. This is the last resurrection. It occurs at the end of the millennial reign. Those who have died throughout the ages, who had rejected Christ, will be resurrected and taken to heaven. Those who are on the earth who have rejected Christ will be taken to heaven. And even we and those living on the earth, the mortals on the earth, will be taken to heaven. But the wicked will be judged here at the white throne. And they will be judged according to their works. And when their names are not written, when it is found their names are not written in the book of life, they will be cast into the lake of fire. And so we'll talk about this next week, or I guess in 2 weeks. But while this judgment is occurring, there's no one left in the earth because everyone has been taken to heaven. So this is the time that the earth is recreated or destroyed and then created as a new heaven and new earth. So we'll talk about that next week or 2 weeks from now. We will also be at the great white throne, but we will not be judged here. We will be judging not our fellow man, but we will be judging the fallen angels. This is according to 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 3. Paul says, "Do you not know that we shall judge angels? How much more things that pertain to this life?" So we're not judging the elect angels, we're judging the fallen angels. And then there's nothing, as we've described earlier, there's nothing in us that is worthy of judgment because Christ was judged for us. So we are there, but we're not judging our fellow man, we're judging the fallen angels. The wicked are resurrected, taken to heaven, judged, and then cast into the lake of fire. And then we'll see what happens in 2 weeks from now when we return to a new heaven, new earth, and new Jerusalem.